I just kind of just want to start, just get some of the brass tacks. How are you?
I'm really good.
How are you today?
Today, I'm really good. I have to say that the last year and a half for me has been really transformative and has gotten me to a space where I have a different reverence for life. I have a different reverence for work. I have a different reverence for relationships. A lot transpired in the 48 years prior. A lot of great stuff. So, like, don't cry for me. But, in living that long, lifes. And so there's moments where you experience extreme turbulence and your own valuation of self gets challenged. And I now appreciate why that happened. It solidified my understanding of self. It solidified my understanding of myself in relation to the world. And it solidified my understand. No, actually, take that back. Not solidified, but it gave me an understanding of the truest value of life, which was counter to what my young self thought it was, you know?
What do you do?
So by trade, I am a manager, now a business owner. I run and created a company called No Smoking, which is predicated on management and consultancy of beings and brands in the four verticals of fashion, film, music, and fine art.
And how do you think that makes people feel?
I honestly don't know. I've lived in this understanding of myself professionally for a year and a half. And so I think it's shifting and changing daily. It's still relatively new. And so I think people, one, are in a bit of a quandary because I've lived and existed in something as purely a manager of talent, model talent primarily, for 30 years. So for there to be a shift in, or like an evolution of this understanding, I think people, one, want to define it, two, want to understand what was the impetus of me wanting to take on more, and three, want to really know how it manifests. And like this baby is still a baby, so you know, I don't know what it's gonna become.
When I think of you and your work prior to no smoking, building no smoking, and what it is today, I think about cultural impact and significance. I think about someone, I don't know, posting their selfies on Instagram with 12 followers, hoping one day to get to a level in fashion one day. And then how you are such an open person. You're very established in your field, but you're such an open person. And so you are not only a pillar in that world, you're also accessible in this kind of weird conversational way. I don't want to say transactional in a negative sense, but in a conversational way with the public. So I think that I think of you as a cultural shaper. Yeah, you might know how to do contracts. Yeah, you might know how to do hard negotiations, but also you shape. You're we're in a different space. You may not realize, and I don't want to embarrass you, but we're in a different space than we would be if you didn't do this.
Honestly, I don't know. I think that once I discovered that there was a life where I could exist and work in the fashion space, which I didn't always know, I never really looked back, and I never had a plan B. I don't know. I think, it's funny. It's like I look at now time, and I always talk about how old I am now, which is freaking me out, but I'll be 50 this year. And I'm so reflective of a lot, right? And so I look at the evolution of beings, not just myself. And you think about like how ordered you are in the beginning of life because you have to be. You don't know a lot, you're learning more than you know. And so you kind of fall into these things that you think you're supposed to do. So for me, from like the age of 11, I aspired to be an attorney. That was the goal. And then eventually it became an entertainment attorney because I knew that I liked something to do with, pop culture. But the attorney part was the respectable part in my head. So I had to keep that. But the entertainment part would be where I would thrive. Like I could appreciate and love that aspect of it, even though now knowing life, the mechanics of that is so not what I would be driven to, you know? And so while I was in college at Morehouse College, I quickly got pulled into doing fashion show production because at a black college, if anybody knows, like fashion shows are like the entertainment of the youth. Like that's what you do. And so I had I'd watched all the Elsa Clench on Style CNN that I could. I had read every Vogue magazine. I was obsessed with models. Like I think, I always used to pay attention to people like Naomi Campbell and Beverly Peel and Veronica Webb and Linda Evangelista and Kate Moss. And so I was like this obsessive kid around models. Like I just couldn't get enough. I could tell you when Linda cut her hair, what the color was, what it was for, the Canard campaign, Stephen Meisel, Italian Vogue. I saw all of that. But I didn't know that there was a business in it. And so I got to college and then they knew that I loved models. And so I got pulled into the fashion show experience. And then I did this weird thing where I did the thing that I thought I should do as a person in production and fashion shows. So I did all this bullshit that was like, if you can't walk down a runway topless, you can't do this. Like I was such a diva and weirdo because I thought that that's what fashion was, which it's not. But I went through all of that and we produced these shows. And then eventually I stopped doing that and I got pulled into a collegiate magazine to do the fashion section. And so there I was styling, doing photography, casting models because it was a small shop. So like I just did a lot. And this guy, Anthony Ziegler, was the head of that section who was fashion obsessed himself. And we did that. And then eventually we did so much that the owners of the magazine were like, you guys are doing too much. And they killed the whole section.
Oh, sure.
And so that goes away. And then this woman named Bobby Moraes, who is actually the key factor in me getting into the business. Bobby Moraes was a woman who used to work at Elite New York, and she moved to Atlanta to work at Elite Atlanta at that time, which no longer exists, to build her family. And so she had, weirdly,
Personal family, work family.
her personal
I got
family.
you.
So she married, and then she had a child. Weirdly, before she even knew me, she named the kid Kyle, right? And we worked together because I would get models from her. And she heard about the fashion section going away, and she offered me an internship at Elite Atlanta. And what she was doing that was transformative was she was doing a celebrity-driven division at Elite Atlanta because the music scene was so big then. Like you have
up. This is around like 90.
This is 94.
Okay, gotcha.
94. So there's like, you have LaFace, you have So Def, you have all these things, like everything's happening at one time, right? And so she decided to do a division centered on representing the artists from those movements. And so she represented a young Usher at 13. She represented Candy Burris, who was an Escape at that time and not a Real Housewife. It was so many different things happening at the same time. Like Big Daddy Kane, the rapper, was there. Like it was like so many things happening. I think his Playgirl had just dropped. Like it was all this stuff at one moment.
Did Whitney live there yet?
Huh?
Did Whitney live there yet?
Whitney was not there yet.
Okay.
I think that was prior to. And so I worked with her as an intern, like, and watched how she built these deals and how she celebrated talent. And I still wanted to be an attorney and professionally once I graduated college. And then I got to senior year. I hadn't taken LSATs. I hadn't applied to law school. I had really good grades though. I was a business management major with a minor in economics. And my grade point average was like, when the top line was 4.0, I was like 3.9. So, all my professors were trying to direct me to Wall Street because I wasn't going to be a lawyer, or I was going to have to take a gap year to do it, which I was never going to do. I'm not that person. And she said, she's like, I want to send you to New York. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, I'm going to introduce you to agencies similar to this, but you cannot stay in Atlanta. Because I had the option of working at Elite Atlanta. She's like, whatever you do, do not stay here. So she sent me to New York, and the first meeting I had was at Vogue. And I met with this woman who asked me first if I was a trust fund baby, which I wasn't. And then second, she asked me if I wanted to marry well. And I was like, I'm gay. And at that time, we couldn't get married. So I was like, I don't think we can even get married. And so she's like, well, you don't want to be in publishing. And so I was like, okay. And I thought she was just being dismissive of me. And she's like, but you need to meet this guy named Ivan Bart. He just left Ford Models, and he's the creative director of IMG. And I was like, what the fuck is IMG? I knew Elite, I knew Ford, I even knew Company. I knew Beth Ann Management. I knew some. I didn't know all, but I knew some. And I just kind of walked away from that meeting going like, okay, like IMG, whatever. I go around on the other meetings, which is to the companies and the women's and all that stuff, Elite and Ford. And at the end of all those meetings, I was like, oh shit, she told me about this guy named Ivan Bart. I never went to IMG. So I literally walked into IMG with a resume and I handed it to the receptionist. The receptionist, for some reason, gets up from the desk. She's like, wait a second. She gets up from the desk and she hands my resume to someone, not Ivan. It's this woman named Jan Planet. Now, I would learn later. And I could hear Jan, because Jan had a loud voice. And Jan said, tell him to come in tomorrow at 10 a.m. So she comes back around and I'm like, 10 a.m.? She's like, yeah. So I was like, okay, great. So I leave, go back to New Jersey because my family's in New Jersey. And I come back the next day at 10 a.m. Jan's not there. The receptionist picks up the phone to Jan, who's her boss, and she starts screaming at her, saying like, you had an appointment at 10 a.m. He's here. Where are you? And I could hear her on the other side screaming back, going, I'm busy. My meeting ran over. Tell him to come at 4. So she hangs up the phone. I'm like, 4 o'clock. She's like, yeah. So I mill about the city all day because I have nothing else to do. And I walk for miles, like uptown, downtown. Then I come back to IMG at 4 o'clock. And I meet Jan, I meet Ivan Bart, I meet this guy named Chuck Bennett who had come from the sports division of IMG to run fashion. And he was John McEnroe, the tennis player's agent. And so I meet all of them. And because I worked at Elite Atlanta as an intern, they weirdly thought that I was there as a spy for Elite. But if anybody knows the franchises of Elite, they're not that unified. They're like all separate entities.
The franchises.
And so they grilled me like I was a spy.
Okay.
And then at the end, they realized I wasn't. And then they're like, oh, you're graduating college in 2 weeks. And I was like, yeah. They're like, 3 weeks, be here.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I had offers of the 10 meetings I had, I probably had offers from 8. But I took the job at IMG.
Before we resume that story, I just have a question. Where does that nerve, that audacity, that nerve come from? I can do this. I can walk in this place. Do you feel like you were propelled by others, or did it come from inside?
I didn't have that nerve. I was naive. I didn't know what to do. I was following Bobby's lead. I was like, okay, I'll do this. I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't, there was no grand intention. It was just like, all right, let me just go work in this thing. We'll figure it out later, right? But I did feel some weird organic connection to the people at IMG for some reason, even though they grilled me like I was a spy. But it made sense to me. And then looking back, if you were just to look at it on paper, it did not make sense. Like Wall Street was offering me like a few $100,000 a year as a salary out
That's
the
a lot of
gate,
money.
which is a lot of
And
money.
especially
Like
that time, that was a lot.
21-year-old kid, like $30,000 was a lot of money. So like $200,000 was like, I was like, ooh, game changer. I can ball out of control. But then for some reason, I took the job at IMG, which was for $25,000 a year. And I hadn't really thought it out like, oh, you're going to be living in New York City by yourself. It's a very expensive city. Even in that time with inflation, still $25,000 did not really work. But I took it. And my advisors at Morehouse were furious. They were like, you're making the worst decision of your life. You're probably the biggest idiot I've ever met. Because on paper, it didn't make sense, but I did it.
And so this is an era, I don't think the human mind is different now than it was 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But I'll say this is an era before it was widely said, diversity, seat at the table, stuff like that, voices being included, inclusive, all that stuff, right? So did you look at yourself, and I'm not saying that you were the only person that was Black, Latino, person of color there at all,
Right.
but there wasn't so much the conversation of that. It was a little bit more, in my outsider opinion, oh, this is the one. This is the Black guy on the shoot. This is the Black girl on the shoot. This is that's the check mark done. So when you're entering
It wasn't even that.
Oh.
Do you think people cared? They didn't care.
Exactly. So how does that conversation evolve?
I, what's interesting is that, as a Black person, from the minute you're born, most of us are told that you have to be 10 times better, work 10 times harder to just get even basic levels of understanding in anything, right? That was always what I heard, like through time. Grandparents, my parents, everybody. And they weren't wrong about that. But because it started at my infancy, it was so normal to me. Like I didn't think about the difference or the lack of. I just knew what it was, right? So I didn't really sit too long in the disparate understanding of our existence in this space. I did notice it. I did, maybe even naively, fought and celebrated it, our existence, because it was what I knew. You know what I mean? So I couldn't do anything outside of myself, right? Was there this grand intention to like save the people at that time? No. It was just to be resolute in who I was, to navigate spaces in a way that was survivalist. But it wasn't this grand overarching thing. And I think in time, just being and existing and being resolute in who I was and not really bending, like I didn't, thankfully to my mom and my grandmother, my grandfather, and my dad, and other family members, I never had the option to dial myself down, to assimilate, or to homogenize my being. Like my mother, I always say, is like the walking personification of like, you got me fucked up. Like that's who she is. Like literally from the day I was born, she's literally the personification of you got me fucked up. So to grow up with that,
Exactly.
I didn't really care about anything. I didn't care about power constructs. I was respectful,
Right.
but don't do too much.
So what happens when you meet those icons of the industry that you looked at from Morehouse might have had? I can say for me, you had the pictures on the wall by Naomi or Linda or something like that. What does that feel like to then cross that threshold? Do you get nervous?
Yeah, I get nervous. I'm human. Like, I mean, you said this thing earlier about, I guess, being a cultural innovator, and I don't see it like that. Like, I'm as human as everybody else. Like, I am as flawed as I am great. Um, I have good days and bad days.
Are you a ball buster?
Yeah, I can be a ball buster, but I also am. I always live in quandary of whether I'm making the right decision, but the reality of my existence is I have to be very definitive in the decisions that I make. So, front facing, I know what I'm talking about. I know what I believe in. I'm not going to necessarily move too far away from it. But on the backside, there is still the little scared little boy that's like, oh, fuck, what? Like, is this the wrong decision? Is this it? Like, like I think everybody's there, no matter what you've done and what you've achieved. Like, today's a new day and like shit could go wrong easy. But, I think like to what I was saying earlier about this existence now is I realize that, I, none of that really matters because it still will work itself out. You know what I mean? I have a spirituality now that allows me to understand that regardless of what is happening in the moment, that God will land me in a space of security and love that is exactly where I need to be.
That's so real. I understand that. There's so many decisions that are 45, 55 decisions. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, oh, it's the easiest decision in the world to make. And the clarity sometimes comes later. The clarity for me sometimes comes, it's always like, you know what? That little thing that shifted me over was this divine timing for me, maybe, whatever, that's guided me in these certain spaces. And okay, fine. I'm not 100% behind this decision, but I have to just move forward. March as if the ground is in front of me. And then later it becomes more and more clear that you clearly made the right decision. And that's what I'm learning more as I get older and everything.
I mean, I realize that I question if I make the decision
Huh.
now. I really do. Because there are certain situations where I'm like, you should have been fucked up. Like, how did that work out? Like, and then things that I thought were awful, like the worst moment of my life. Like, and in that moment, I was like, God, why are you putting this weight on my back? Led me to bigger understandings of myself. And so now I'm more reticent to say that I feel like an actor in a movie in which I am not the director. I'm just reading the lines. You know what I mean? I'm being driven by something bigger, badder, better than me. You know what I mean? And I think that's where the spirituality comes in. So I just accept it.
Do you feel that guiding hand toward from IMG to like no smoking and then like the rest of you? Like, did you feel that through that transition?
I think I've always had an appreciation of God. I don't think that I had the level of reverence that I have now for God and spirituality. And I did think at some points early that it was me. You know what I mean? But I also will say that, like, I went from IMG, which was a really great existence, I will say, and one that, Ivan, I'm grateful for that woman, Michelle, for introducing me to the idea of Ivan, who's no longer here. He passed away last year. Ivan poured into me in a way that I could never pay back. It's funny because I look back and I'm like, you were such a bratty, petulant little child. Like, I would be like awful. Like I would fight. Like he promoted me. Like, so my first job at IMG was not to manage anything. I was working in the art department. So my job was to like put together the portfolios of models and composite cards of models. We didn't even have a website at that point. There was no thing called the web. And within a year of that, no, 6 months of that, he promoted me to new faces. So then I was scouting the world and managing new models. And then a year into that, he offered me the job to work with what is called the main board in an agency, which is like with the bigger talent, right? And I remember turning the job down because I was like, I don't want to be like you. I want to be young and cool. I want to deal with new things. I don't want to be old. I was 23, an asshole. And I remember him storming out of the office. He slammed the door. It was a thing. And I think he kind of threw his hands up and he's like, who the fuck is this kid? And it wasn't out of arrogance. I just was saying what I felt. Like I was young and I didn't want to be old and I didn't want to have like what I saw as the responsibilities of what they did because they seemed so stressed out all the time and like nothing was good and it was always like a problem and, you know. And so I never wanted that. And then I remember Ivan's right-hand woman came in and she's like, did you just turn down a job promotion? And I was like, is that what that was? Like, so fucking awful.
Bitchy little kid.
Yeah, such a queen. Like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, that's what that was. And she's like, what is it that you don't want to do? And I was like, I just love developing new talent. I just want to do that. And she's like, well, you can do it on the main board. You'll have bigger access and you'll make more money. At that time, making $25,000 a year, I was shopping at Barney's, not paying my rent, like doing all the wrong things. And like, so money was a real thing. So I was like, the only thing that really appealed to me was more money. So I took it. And then I got put on the account with her, with Tyra Banks, which freaked me out because Tyra and I are the same age, but Tyra was wildly more successful and important to the fashion conversation than I ever could be at that point. And it was intimidating. And like, this is that moment where you're like working now with the person who sat on my wall, who I idolized, who I respected, who did all the things. And I was just a new kid coming along. So that was that moment where I faced it. And in survival mode, I played cool like a cucumber. And I was like, yeah, I got this. Like, whatever. I was terrified. Like, what the fuck am I going to do?
Right.
But then you start to normalize it and work in it and develop things around it. And then it becomes like, and then it's like that moment where you like ride the bike for the first time. So like, you know, dad's holding the bike seat and then lets it go, but you don't know he let it go and you've been riding the bike. And then the minute you realize that you're riding the bike by yourself, you fall. It was that. And then you just get back up. And then they got to coach you into doing it by yourself. And then eventually you do it. And now you don't even care about dad doing anything anymore. You're like, I got this. So that's really what happens in that moment.
You mentioned that, what's your moment of beauty? Like when you first, you know, you mentioned the models on the wall and then meeting them in person and then the work you do right now with No Smoking and the superstars that are right now. That I always think about, how do you recognize beauty? And I mean like the most pluralized version of that.
Well, what I do isn't just hinged on beauty. Like, I think beauty is a base, but beauty is also way subjective. So that's what it is. But I think I'm also looking for capability and fortitude, right? Like, I need you to have something to say. I need you to be prepared to level up and to be strong in a highly competitive space. So beauty is fine, but like just being beautiful is not enough. And I can't really say what I look for because it only really manifests individually. So like when I see it, I feel it, and it manifests so differently in different people. But it's that thing that arrests me, like where you feel extraordinary. You
That's
know what I mean?
almost like that electric moment, that indescribable moment.
You can't put words on it. It's just a feeling. You know, like I remember seeing the photograph like everybody did of Anok Yai at Howard's homecoming. I was like, wow, she's really beautiful, right? But then as an agent, as a manager, I also criticized that photograph, right? I was like, she's great. Like, I can feel it. Like, the beauty is astounding, right? But then I was like, maybe we need to do this and maybe we need to do that, but it's going to be great, but it needs to be managed. And then I had her flown into New York, and then she shows up to my office, this long, lean, beautiful woman, and all the accoutrements that were in that picture that I didn't necessarily want to see, they weren't there. And literally, the Anok Yai of that day, just younger and not as experienced, was the same as it is today, every bit of it. And I was like, wait a second, like, fuck, you are incredible, right?
Energy.
And she didn't say a lot of words at that point. She just kind of like, and I always joke with her, and I'm like, you were just playing shy just to get in the room, right? She laughs at me, but because Knock has so much to say. And I discovered that 6 months after representing her. But it was her energy, her feeling, everything about her. Yes, she was beautiful. The world said it. That wasn't a question. But there was a fire in her, even without saying words, that I could feel, itching to get out.
I call it like a lightning bolt moment. Like for me, getting into art or creative, I didn't even have the words for it. But I remember seeing music videos, embarrassingly, and not embarrassing. Let me just
Don't
be
be
honest.
embarrassed about
Let
that.
me be honest. It was Madonna's Borderline video, being
Oh,
a
yeah.
kid buried in the suburbs.
I was obsessed with that video.
And when that video came out, I thought it was New York because I didn't know better. And I thought that she was like the coolest streetwise
Black
person.
crop top and the black.
Of course, the
yeah.
witch of the Bruja skirt,
Yeah.
right? But when she kicked that pole
Yeah.
in that part,
Yeah.
that seared in my mind of like, oh, people are like so angry, the teen angst. I wasn't even a
Yeah.
teenager, and I was, oh, they're just they're pushing through life, and that just kind of started this lightning bolt moment of pushing through life with style and anger and fury and kinetic energy.
Yeah.
And that propelled me to New York or whatever shenanigans I got up to.
Madonna was one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I moved to New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is next for you?
What's next for me? So much. Like, I feel like this is going to be the longest last act ever, God willing. But this is my last act, and it's going to shift into a lot of different spaces. I am now in a space where I want to explore everything that I always dreamt about being a part of. Virgil, may he rest in peace, said, make decisions like your 17-year-old self. Weirdly, as a 50-year-old person, I feel as youthful as that 17-year-old kid again. And I think because I walked away from the established corporate address and have asserted myself in my own business understanding, it has allowed me the freedom of thought and expansive possibility. And I now truly feel like I could be the biggest benefit to my clients because I now, too, again, want to take over the world with a lot more understanding, a lot more capability, and a lot more vision of the strategy of how to get to all the things I want to do. But I want to do a lot of shit. But what that is, I mean, right now it's some things like, I want to, play in the art world more. I want to engage the film community more. The things that I didn't professionally do. I want to be more of the part of the creative process. So yeah.
And also, you're guided not even by you're guided by the energy of it, the timing of it, divine timing of it.
Yeah. And it's all the things that like I've loved, but I was afraid to assert that I loved, for fear of lack of understanding, but like, it's funny. It's like Saturday Night Live used to do that skit, Sally O'Malley. I'm 50 years old, and I'm going to kick, I'm going to stretch. Like, that's where I'm at now. Like, I'm like, fuck it. Like,
This is it.
I'm 50. Look, bitch, like, I've done a lot. Like, so challenge me, no. Like, it's not going to happen. Like, I'm not infallible. It's not to say I'm perfect and I can do everything, but I'm definitely going after it. You know what I mean? And no one's going to tell me otherwise. And so it's this clarity, this like freedom that age allows me, that I was so terrified of when I was young. Uncle is uncle right now. Uncle is like, I'm gonna say what the fuck I'm gonna say. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't, and that's what it is.
Well, I honestly appreciate this time talking. First of all, I really appreciate. I think about trust
Yeah.
a lot. You
Yeah.
don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You're a busy guy.
What?
Don't
do that.
But dude, I really appreciate this because I think that the moment to like say, you know what, I trust Khary to talk. I trust Khary for this conversation. I trust that we're going to have about 45 minutes, an hour, or whatever long this ends up editing being, a good time
Yeah.
to explore ourselves, and I really appreciate it.
Our worlds are toppled on top of each other, and I've always appreciated your contribution to this understanding, and just also your way of being has like always been like this thing. And it's funny because my assistant was like, how well do you guys know each other? I was like, this is actually the first real conversation that we're gonna have, but I feel like I know you in so many aspects because of like the 1 degree of separation and all the things. But yeah, trust, it wasn't hard at all. It was easy. It was very easy to say yes to.
I appreciate the time, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shake those beautiful rings in your hands, too.
Oh my God.
My God. All right, man.
That's for when I have to rough people up.
All right, cool. You're solid. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Let's turn on this
That
air,
was
too,
easy.
before I sweat through this shirt, man. All right. Appreciate it.
This was
Thank
an
you.
amazing experience. If you fucking think about it, I'm gonna kill you. You just say yes when he calls you.